25th into session. Let's see. Roll call and determination of a quorum, please.
Chairperson Sattler.
Present.
Hang on.
Here.
Vice Chair Porters.
Here.
Commissioner Aswine.
Here.
Commissioner Salerno.
Here.
Commissioner Monroy.
Here.
Commissioner Stoll.
Here.
Commissioner Tingle.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Commissioner Salerno, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I'd be delighted. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Planning Commission, including any matters that is not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. Is there any public comment at this time? Seeing none. For possible action, approval of minutes for September 27th, 2017 meeting.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes of the September meeting.
We have a motion by Commissioner Aswine. We have
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Border.
Chair, may I make some corrections?
Certainly.
On under public comment, Jerry Goodman spoke in favor. Was not Jerry Goodman the owner of the Nichols Lane property?
What page are you looking at? Because the owner of the Nichols Lane property spoke under that item. Is that what you're referring to?
Page 3 in the middle.
Right. On the Nichols Lane item, was not Jerry Goodman the owner of the property?
Oh.
Should we not identify him as the owner of the property? I think if
the recorder's saying he didn't identify himself as such at the meeting.
well, I think Beekoff did when he came up. So
He was the applicant. He's not the owner.
right, but just the thought that it might be nice to identify that he's actually the owner of the property, if possible. The other thing is just staff may have caught this already. The paragraph above it. Second sentence, Mr. Woodruff believes that a two-story structure would case, I think he meant to say cause, would cause items to be thrown onto his property instead of case. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stoll, I will take your comments and put them in today's minutes, just to make sure what's on the recording matches what's in the minutes.
Any other comments on the minutes, or because we have a motion and a second still to approve them? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And Chair, I'll abstain, Elise Monroy, as I missed the meeting.
Thank you. Modification of agenda. Is there any modification, Leah, needed for the agenda at this time?
No modifications for us.
Okay. Public hearing matters. SUP-17-131 for possible action to consider a request for a special use permit for Donald Gurney, property owner Donald Gurney, to convert an art studio into a guest building for property zone single-family 6,000 FS6 located at 608 Chernus Drive, APN 001-045-13. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. The request, as you stated, is to convert a 576 square foot art studio into a guest building. The 8,625 square foot lot backs up to the parking lot of the medical building, as you'll see on this aerial photograph. Permits were issued in 2015 to construct an art studio. The site plan is posted for your consideration. Since the construction of the art studio, the building has been converted into guest quarters, and I put up a picture of the floor plan for you. The applicant is being provided with procedural due process to make the guest quarters lawful. Per Section 1804075-3, a guest building is a conditional use in the SF6 zoning district, therefore it requires a special use permit. I just want to point out that Section 1.4 of the development standards includes standards for guest buildings, including a limitation on the occupancy, limiting it to family members and non-paying guests, and a requirement for deed restriction acknowledging the occupancy limitation. Because this is a conditional use, it can only be established if you issue a special use permit. You may issue a special use permit upon making each of the 7 required findings of fact in the affirmative. Staff has gone through those findings, and we have been able to make the findings in the affirmative, and we are recommending approval subject to conditions. Mr. Gurney, the property owner, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
From the original plan for the art studio, it looked like the living area was the art studio and the bedroom was the craft room, I believe, but the bathroom, et cetera, was all part of that original plan, correct?
Correct. There was a bathroom in the approved plan for an art studio.
They just changed the use of the other 2 rooms, basically, and added the kitchen area. Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I noticed in the conditions that there is a deed restriction requirement. Since we are hopefully in the near future going to be discussing accessory units, what happens to that deed restriction if we do approve accessory units as an allowed use without or for rental?
I haven't seen an example of the deed restriction, but going forward, what we can do with the deed restriction is reference the codified requirement or limitation, if you will, on the occupancy. So if that codified limitation were to be eliminated, we're referencing a non-existent code provision. So it would follow. That's the best I can think of at this moment.
We had several similar things to this in the South Carson area for mother-in-law quarters, et cetera, in the last couple of years. They all had that same, can't be rented, et cetera. Were they deed restricted as well?
Probably, because Section 1.4, and that's why I pointed out that section because I anticipated questions on it, does limit the occupancy for a guest building to family members and non-paying guests, and does require a deed restriction that references back to the occupancy limitation. And that's in the development standards.
Is it clear that they will have to get a new building permit? And the question is, if somebody's living in that unit now, should they at least have a temporary CO? Because that building was obviously not approved for habitable space. The other question is, there's reference in the applicant's materials about art studio and students and the instructor. So if staff could clarify what's going on, is a home occupation happening there? Are there students and off-site instructors coming to the property? If you could explain that, that'd be helpful.
I'll take the easy one first, the building permit. If you look at your conditions of approval, condition number 9 does require the submittal of plans for the conversion of the previously approved craft room art studio to a residential use. Condition 10 says the plans have to comply with all code requirements for the conversion. Condition 10 talks about the requirement for the building permit. And condition 11, that's talking about that's not building code, sorry. So I think we've captured the building code requirements, and we are recommending that you include those in the conditions. This can't just de facto become a residential unit. It does need to go through the building permitting process and inspections. In terms of your second question, I'm going to defer mostly to the applicant. My understanding is the intent was initially an art studio. The family situation changed such that there was a need for a guest building with an on-site family member residing there, and that they are no longer utilizing the space as an art studio, no longer intend to utilize it, given the immediate situation. Now, should that situation change, they do want the ability to go back to an art studio, and again, to the extent there were changes to the building that necessitated a building permit, they would need to obtain that.
So if it's a functioning art studio, would that not be considered a home occupation?
I guess I would need more clarification from the applicant on what that means. To me, an art studio is a place where you go practice your craft. It's not a place where you have people come and view your craft. You may have an open house on occasion, but not periodically or on a regular schedule, in which case I'm not certain that I would call it a home occupation, but I would need to know more about the use. I didn't study the use that was contemplated in 2015, so I can't really speak specifically to that.
Only because the applicant states specifically that they want to keep the sofa, the television remain where they are so that the students and the instructor can have access to instructional videos. So that's why I'm just asking the question.
They can't have classes there and students coming. If you have a home occupation permit, you can't have people coming to your home. And thank you for pointing that out. We'll speak to Mr. Gurney about that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Voters?
Hope in the history, it references the building, the deed restriction was filed in July, and as part of the conditions, we're asking for a deed restriction. Are those the same, or is there another deed restriction?
When this initially came in 2015, as I understand it, the planner who worked on it, Kathy Green, who's the one who prepared this report, met with the Gurneys, and there was discussion about making this a guest building, and Kathy Green had asked questions about that. The applicant said, no, it's not our intent to utilize as a guest building. And so Kathy Green had a deed restriction prepared that said this is not a guest building, and if it becomes a guest building, there needs to be a special use permit. That's not in the code. That was just something she pursued based on her conversation.
So these are different deed restrictions. One of them is now expired or is no longer applicable, and the one that we're requiring is the one about residents.
Correct. The one that I'm recommending you require is right out of the code. The one that was filed, and I want to say it was July 2017, was in a tickler file, and when Kathy went back to see if this building permit for the art studio had been finalized, it had been, so she went ahead and pursued the recordation of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Would the applicant please come forward, or representative of the applicant?
Things change when you turn 80.
Welcome, sir. First of all, would you state your name and...
Donald G. Gurney.
Yes, Mr. Gurney, you've seen all the recommended conditions of approval. Do you accept all those the way they're written, sir?
Yes, I do. Tentatively, I couldn't hear all of the comments and questions, but I'm sure someone from the planning department will follow up on it and make sure that I accommodate those requests.
Is there anything you'd like to add to their presentation?
Only that the lady that's living in there is a family member. It's not outside the family.
Did we have questions for Mr. Gurney? Hope, did you want to clarify that?
Mr. Gurney, are you having art classes in that building?
No. My wife became temporarily infirmed shortly after we moved, after we had that built, and it hasn't happened. I don't think she's capable of it anymore.
Okay, so just for the benefit of the record and the benefit of the commission, you will not be able to conduct classes and have people come to your house to learn how to pursue art projects. So just that it's not part of this application, but it's a different city rule. So I'm just advising that you of that rule, okay?
I understand.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll bring it back for questions or comments.
Public comment.
Oh, excuse me. Comments from the public. Anyone wish to make comment or on this application? Seeing none. Back for questions or a motion or comments from the staff or board.
Motion?
I'll go.
Mr. Monroe?
Okay, Chair Elise Monroy for the record. With the clarification from staff on the record about the utilization of the property, I'm prepared to make a motion to approve.
Thank you. You want to lead the motion?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't think I have made a motion. I thought I needed a second after that. Okay, sorry, guys. Okay, I move to approve SUP 17131, a special use permit to allow an existing building to be used as a guest building on property zone single family 6,000, located at 608 Journeys Drive, APN 001-04513, based on findings and conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
A second for Commissioner. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Next item, SUP-17-136 for possible action to consider a request for a special use permit from Spear and Phillips LLC, property owner John Block, to allow the expansion of a non-conforming use, specifically a multifamily residential use on property zone single-family SF6 located at 504 Phillips Street, APN 003-243-04. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. The applicant is seeking to convert the second floor of a garage into a dwelling. The site currently has 4 apartments and will continue to have 4 apartments. As part of the work, the applicant will be increasing the number of bedrooms in the owner's unit from 1 bedroom to 2 bedrooms. There's no other change for the other 3 units in terms of the bedroom count. As the subject property is zoned to SF 6000, the multifamily uses are not an allowed use in this zoning district, but as the use did lawfully establish, it's considered a non-conforming use. The subject property is in the historic district, and I want to speak to that for a minute. The applicant's been working on this property since 2004. The home was built in 1925. It is a contributing structure in the historic district. As you'll see in the staff report, when you look at previous reviews, you'll see the applicant has gone before the Historic Resource Commission numerous times. Having said that, the Historic Resource Commission has authority over exterior modifications in the historic district. The Historic Resource Commission does not have jurisdiction over land use. So I just want to be very clear, because I don't want anyone to think, oh, well, the HRC approved this. No, the HRC approves what it looks like. They don't approve use. They don't approve density. They don't determine if something's a non-conforming use. That's you. This is a special use permit because it's a request to expand a non-conforming use. Also in 2000, so hopefully that's clear. I just wanted to make it clear. Okay, also in 2004, the applicant participated in a major project review related to rebuilding the garage. As I understand it, the original garage was damaged in a fire. As part of the major project review application, the applicant was not just rebuilding the garage, but was seeking to place a dwelling unit on the second floor of the garage. At that time, according to correspondence prepared by the planning manager, there were 5 units on the site. So today we have 4 units on the site. In 2004, when the applicant came forward with a major project review, there were 5 units on the site per the planning manager's correspondence. Also in 2004, the planning manager advised the applicant that the placement of the dwelling in the garage would constitute an expansion of a non-conforming use and would require a special use permit. Again, there's no change in unit count, there's no change in density, so why am I calling this an expansion of a non-conforming use? And I'll use the example I used with the applicant yesterday. Let's pretend we have a hardware store, The hardware store is housed in, let's just pretend, 1,000 square foot building. The hardware store is lawfully there, but it's a non-conforming building. The zoning doesn't allow for a hardware store. Business is good. The owner of the hardware store wants to build a second building for, say, the gardening equipment or whatever. It's still a hardware store. It's still on the same piece of land, but now they have a second building. They put it in another building. So here we're starting with 4 units. We're ending with 4 units, but rather than housing all 4 units in the single building, we're now housing 4 units in 2 buildings. And the garage did not have a dwelling unit in it previously. The Planning Commission does have the authority to allow an expansion of a nonconforming use upon making each of the 7 required findings of fact in the affirmative. The staff has reviewed these findings in the staff report, and we are able to make the findings. The primary reason we can make those findings is this use exists. The impacts of this use exist. The impact on public facilities, on traffic, on pedestrian activity, any noise generated, 4 units are 4 units are 4 units. And so the staff believes that since the use is already established, and this is just this, it's a reconfiguration of the units, but the density is there, each of the findings of fact that you need to find can be met. I will note that the HRC has approved the exterior design of the garage and found it met the standards for the historic district. I do want to note 2 things. One, there was a letter from some neighbors, and they indicated that work was being done unlawfully. This permit for this dwelling was initially issued in error. The neighbors contacted the building official. The building official investigated it, and she stopped work because she realized the permit had been issued in error. It had not been routed to all the various city agencies who were required to review the application. One of those agencies who did not initially see it was the Planning Division. We identified it as an expansion of a nonconforming use and realized we did not have the authority to allow it. It needed to come to the Planning Commission. So if you do read or if you believe that work occurred unlawfully, I'm not certain that's the case. What I am certain of 100% is that permit was issued in error, and as soon as the city identified the mistake, it was stopped. The second thing is what you'll see is a lot of conditions of approval, particularly from the fire department regarding sprinklering and so on. 2 modifications to the conditions of approval that are fire related. One, the addition of a condition that says the proposed construction creates a change of use from R3 to R2 occupancy. The applicant must submit plans and obtain permits to convert the space to an R2 occupancy. That's similar to the question Commissioner Stoll had. Do they understand they have to get a building permit? Yes, they have to get a building permit, and by the way, you're changing your occupancy. So it just sort of putting the applicant on notice that the fire department and building department will be looking at an R2 occupancy. Secondly, on conditions 6, 7, and 8, there are prescriptive requirements that are from the building code and the fire code. Those codes both have prescriptive requirements, but they also have the ability to identify alternative means and methods. Meaning, although maybe the code says you need fire sprinklers, if you identify an alternative mean and method to the satisfaction of the building official and the fire marshal to reach that exact same objective using a different methodology, they have the authority to approve that. So I am recommending the building official and fire marshal have agreed that wording be added to conditions 6, 7, and 8, recognizing that the applicant may propose alternative means and methods, and the building official and the fire marshal, as allowed per code, may allow the alternative means and methods. So the exact wording would be, or identify alternative means and methods to the satisfaction of the building official and the fire marshal. So with those 2 changes, the staff is recommending approval based on the ability to make the findings of fact, and it's subject to the conditions of approval. Susie Block is present, and she'll be representing the property owner. And I'll answer questions.
I just wanted to clarify, Hope, that on page 3 where it shows where they went to the historical, that this was always determined to have a garage with an apartment. There's 3 different, it says demolish garage and build apartment, correct?
Correct. Since 2004, the applicant has been talking about this garage with the second floor apartment. And in fact, as I told Dan Yu, I think yesterday, I've been here a year and a half, and I've been hearing about the second floor apartment. I thought it was already there. When the permit came through, I had to do the research and figure out where this stood. The building was built in 2005.
Thank you. Staff, Commissioner Salerno.
I'm a little bit confused because with the special use permit, which is filed by the applicant, he's indicated 4 units, if I can read that right. It says, converting space over garage into a living area, keeping the density at 4 units. Well, if I understand it right, in fact, it is 4 units plus a residence. Is that correct?
That is not correct. Right now, today, there are 4 units.
4 units total.
The applicant is correct. The applicant is proposing to remain at 4 units, but reconfigure how those 4 units are arranged, if you will, on the property. I did have an inquiry from one commissioner regarding bedroom counts and whether there would be modifications to the bedroom counts. The answer is yes. The owner's unit is proposed to go from 1 bedroom to 2 bedrooms. All other 3 units will stay at the same bedroom count.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have one other. Go ahead. Okay. I've noticed on the plans that it's indicated that at the property line on 2 sides of the property there is a proposed fence, and as I drove by there for the second time today, I noticed that some posts are being placed in, and it says on the plan that property line fence will be 48 inches high. I think that is not in accordance with normal standards and also in accordance with what's in the neighborhood. The neighborhood seems to have 36-inch high fences around the property. Can you speak to that?
The applicant has gone before the HRC specifically regarding this fence and some stepping stones. And there's actually, I believe he's been before the commission at least 2 separate meetings on this fencing. And the HRC has approved the fencing. They have found it to be consistent with the standards for the district. I don't remember right this second the specific design standards are going to be implemented, but I do know that the HRC has reviewed practically every aspect of this project.
And a 4-foot fence is okay with them? Is that what you're saying?
You're saying the post is 4 feet?
Now, the design plan
So
calls for
Okay.
4 foot.
48 inch
Oh.
high picket fence.
It's.
Can I ask a follow-up question on this? So I have a piggybacking question, just so I am understanding our process. So a couple months ago, we considered an application about a fence in that area. On the west side, I think it was North 5th or East 5th. So it might not have been the historic district, but we still had to review the application because of the height of the fence. So why would we not have to approve the height of the fence in this instance?
Okay, 2 things. First of all, luckily Lee Plemmel knows the fence regs better than I do. A 48-foot tall or a 48-inch tall open style fence is permitted. So his fence height is allowed per code. And the design, although I can't remember the details of the design, but I remember there was a lot of discussion about caps on the corners and so on. Anyway, that has been approved by the Historic Resource Commission, and that is within their purview. Now, if a fence is going to exceed its allowable height, and the most recent one you had was the gentleman who had put up the deer fencing, a fence may exceed its allowable height. Oh, you just had the other one too over on Betts, remember? The solid, like 8-foot tall one. So you've seen quite a few. It may exceed the allowable height subject to a special use permit, and only the Planning Commission can issue a special use permit. So you only see the fences when they're exceeding the height.
Okay, but the 48 inches is indeed within the height requirements and because it's
Correct.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Mr. Salerno's question.
I guess so. I have a question, and it's just a clarification. On the notice statement, it says that the property owner is John Block and that the applicant is Spear and Phillips LLC. And then on the motion that we have, suggested motion, it says that the property owner is Spear and Phillips LLC.
I'm sorry.
Not down here, though.
I'm looking at, the staff report would be working off their application, and on their application, they indicate the applicant agent is Susan Block, and that the property owner is Spear and Phillips LLC. Is that consistent with the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that.
And I'm on it. That's the official assessor's record.
Okay.
For it, in the ownership.
The agenda item was incorrect in the wording. I mean, I don't think it makes a big difference. I just wanted to get it clarified that we had the right motion.
As long as we read that motion, we should be correct. Other questions?
Okay.
Mr. Reporter.
Hope. I have a question still about the units itself. There are physically 4 units in the property right now. Are they all one-bedroom units?
I'm going to have to let the applicant answer that because he told me the breakdown, and I don't trust my memory on that.
All right. But so we have 3 units that may or may not be the same size, and we have the one master unit which the owner lives in, which is now going to be a 2-bedroom.
Correct. What the applicant advised me is, okay, right now today, how many bedrooms are in each unit? And when you're all done, how many bedrooms will be in each unit? And the only one that was having an additional bedroom was the owner's unit. It was going from 1 to 2. Everything else was not an increase. It was not a decrease. It wasn't a change. In terms of what is that number, I feel like they were all ones, but again, it was a conversation. I just can't trust my memory on that.
But the size of those, what you're saying is what I'm asking. The size of those has not changed as far as bedroom count.
Correct. That was my specific question, and the answer was only one of the units was changing in terms of bedroom count, and that was the owner's unit to go from 1 bedroom to 2 bedrooms.
Thank you.
Two thoughts. One, I'm confused in seeing 2 different property addresses. One is the 504 Phillips and one is 602 Spear. Was this house formerly 2 different parcels that were combined?
Actually, you're bringing up a good point. I'm going to have the owner explain why it's referenced under 2 different addresses. When we have the HRC applications, it becomes a challenge as well, because historically there's been 2 addresses to describe this property. I don't believe, having seen the property, that it was 2 properties, because the house is so big, there's not really room for a second property, in my opinion. But in terms of whether it's addressed off Spear or addressed off Phillips, I'll let the owner speak to you about that. But in various city records, it's referenced different ways.
The other concern is we don't have floor plans in front of us. And I think it's going to be difficult to feel comfortable in approving a special use permit when we don't have the existing floor plans and the proposed floor plans. Now, the other application that's coming up on the agenda for West Washington, we have the floor plans showing the conversion of the office to the apartments. And I think it's very hard for us to not actually see the floor plans today and then what's being proposed especially since this is non-conforming use. I think it'd be very hard, at least for me, to make a decision on this.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Hinkle.
Because the number of units aren't changing, I'm assuming, and that's always dangerous, that the parking situation is not changing either. Is there off-street parking? Is it all on-street parking?
The requirement would be 2 parking spaces per unit, so since we're starting with 4 units and ending with 4 units, there would be no change in the parking demand or the parking requirements.
Any other questions for staff? Applicant like to come forward, please.
Hello.
For the record, please.
I'm Susie Block.
Can you turn the mic on?
It's on.
It is on.
I'll get closer, sorry.
You've seen the recommended conditions of approval and the addition with the, as far as the fire sprinkler system, et cetera. Are you accepting those as written?
Yes.
Okay. We have questions, obviously.
Has the applicant submitted building permit? I know there are conditions, but have you provided staff with building plans showing the existing structure and the proposed remodeling in the garage?
Yes, we have, haven't we? Yes, they have all the plans, yes.
But the planning commission hasn't seen those.
The plans were submitted to the building department, and that's what the part where I indicated the building department approved the permit in error. And upon identifying the error, the building official stopped construction, and it went to all the agencies. When it came to our agency, we brought it before the Planning Commission. So yes, the applicant has submitted for a building permit, did obtain a building permit, in fact, but then it was stopped. It also was not, at the time it was issued, routed to the fire department. So now that the fire department has seen it, they've identified some requirements that they have as well.
Right, but as of right now, those new building plans have not been submitted to planning. Right.
No, they wouldn't do that until you've completed your review, because you're the entitlement.
Well, in support of that, wouldn't it be appropriate for us to review those plans?
You usually would look at the details. Sorry. You would look at the details of a construction document. Our building official, Charlene Gorowski, is here, and she can speak to you about the composition of those plans, but it included the structural design of the bridge connecting the buildings. So
I'm not saying that should be our purview, but certainly there's enough of a question here about how many units are there and what size are they and what do they look like, and some sort of a floor plan would have seemed to have been appropriate for us to look at. So because that would solve a lot of the problems in these documentation.
Your large sheet has a floor plan of the new area of the open, but not the existing. So the existing consists of 1,204 square feet of 3 units. So I guess you can. I'm not sure. I appreciate kind of wanting to have more information, but I'm not sure what you get out of.
So are the 3 existing?
And I think so. Somebody should ask the question of how many bedrooms each unit has, to help establish that. I know that was a concern, but I'm not sure what additional information you're going to get out of where kitchens are, where bathrooms are.
The 3 existing units are as is. They won't be changing.
No, there's 4 existing units in the existing house, and 2 of them are going to be combined into one, so that there will be.
So that's
one of those units is being absorbed by the second bedroom, which keeps the bedroom count the same when you go to the garage.
Correct.
Apartment.
Okay.
That's what the 4 are going to 3 in the main house because they're absorbing one, going back to the master, the larger 2-bedroom. That's how the bedrooms are staying the same, correct? Clear to everyone now? Any other questions?
Our planning manager indicated that 8 parking spaces are required. Can you tell me where they are on the plan? I can't see where you can park 8 cars on the property.
Well, there aren't 8 cars parked on the property. There's a driveway on one side that 4 cars could fit in there, but usually 2. There's another one on the other side of the property, 2 deep. So right now you've already covered 6 cars.
So
but there is street parking also, yes.
Right. So you'd park them in tandem, so to speak.
Well, you could do that, but no, we don't. But there is street parking. It's ample space for street parking. We're not increasing any occupancy. They're all, right now, all of our attendants are single people. They have 1 car apiece. They don't have multiple vehicles parked on the street.
So you'd have 2 in the garage, 2 in each driveway is 6, and then like you say, there's plenty of street parking as well. Thank you.
And somehow you have to work out how the tenants are going to park. One will park in the garage and one behind that in the driveway, and et cetera. That's the way it would work. But I think that meets with the requirements of parking.
It does.
And I would ask staff if it does.
Sorry, what?
If the parking situation that Ms. Blunt...
Does that work?
The code does have a provision that does not recognize, it says you're not supposed to park in tandem. Having said that, and considering the findings for the special use permit and looking at impacts, right now today, if we do nothing, you have 4 units. And you have the parking situation that you have, and they're allowed to keep that. So it's why it's a non-conforming use. The use has been established, it's been lawfully established, it's been documented through correspondence in 2004 that there were 5 units. For later correspondence documented 4 units, and the parking situation has been what it's been. So it's there today.
And these units have been occupied for some time, so you've been parking at these places for a number of years now already?
Can you address the address disparity between Phillip Street and Spear Street?
I could. I'll let my husband explain it. He could explain it a lot better.
Okay.
Because our mail never comes to the right place either. We suffer.
And from the city side, if it's multi
for the record, John Block, the single member owner of Spear and Phillips LLC, which owns the property. The address, it was actually, the assessor's records are a little bit skewed sometimes, but it was built in 1875 by Walter Toby. His first front door was at 602 West Spear Street. In 1954, Herb Winchester sold the property. I think there's been change of title 50 times since 1860. Herb Winchester sold the property, and the new owner converted it into a 5-unit apartment building. And then subsequently after that, a 6th unit was put in between a garage and a shed. It was like an outdoor patio that they covered over. And when I purchased it, that's where the fire was. It demolished the garage and the 6th unit that had been there for years. When I moved in, there were 5 units in that main building, and we removed one. It was a bedroom with a bathroom on it and a hot plate. Didn't seem very safe. So in 1875, the address was 602 West Spear Street. In the conversion in 1954, they had 602 West Spear Street entering from Spear Street. The lower portion, the 1-story portion to the west, was 604 West Spear Street, separate unit. And the 2 units upstairs, because when you guys came by and saw where the front door was, there's 2 doors. There used to go up those steps, and then you turn and go up the stairwell, and there were 2 casement windows, so there was no front door going into the downstairs apartment from Phillips Street. So you had 504 Phillips number 3 and 504 Phillips number 4. When we built the garage in 2004, City GIS said pick an address. So since there were 2 casement windows on that front porch, I picked 602 West Spear Street. So after we remodeled I've done about 3/4 of the building, and we took 1,500 pounds of aluminum siding off the outside. We're restoring it to the original siding that's underneath, and I just wish I had $1 for every hour I put into it. So I guess so when we did it, every time Stephanie or Amy upstairs ordered a pizza, they'd come knocking on our door. And they were confused. So I called the assessor's office, and they said, we can change the address. What would work better? And I said 504 Phillips. So now the front porch to the left, ours is 504 Phillips, Unit 101. The one in the back is considered 102, 203, and 204 upstairs. So I guess there's that. Yeah. The bedroom situation, the unit that Susie and I reside in downstairs is 1,100 square feet with 1 bedroom. The unit in the back is the single-story portion is 675 square feet with 1 bedroom. Upstairs at the front where you see the 3 windows drawn out there, it's 475 square feet with 1 bedroom. The apartment behind it is 675 square feet with 1 bedroom. So what we're trying to do, since Susie's mom's out here visiting and we get to keep her at the City Center Motel, we just wanted a 2nd bedroom. And so went to the building department, went through HRC, got approval. So the apartment that would be above the garage is going to be 1 bedroom. It's like a studio loft. And the back 1-story portion will become part of ours, so unit 101 and 102 will be combined to have a spare bedroom for the owners. The owners plus 3 tenants, even though technically we're an owner, or we're a tenant as well, because Spear and Phillips owns it, the corporate thing. And so we rent from my company, I guess is what we call it. The fence, I'll go back to that, it is legal. The corner posts are 48 inches. The rest of it is 43.5 inches. And it's the same height that Peter Smith has over on the Bellcamp House, over on John and Nevada Street. It's the same height and configuration as Resource Concepts on Telegraph and Minnesota Street. It emulates the fence that used to be around the Episcopal Church, Kemfer Kroll's law office, the J. Neely Johnson House, and that's where the Citibank building is that's being renovated by the Adams Hub. So it's taking it back to that.
Other questions, Commissioner Salerno?
Thank you. I've noticed that there's a Knox box required, and that seems reasonable. How do you do it when there are 4 different units with 4 different doorways? You just put 4 different keys in the Knox box? Because that's for the firemen the Knox box is for the purpose for the fire department to be able to get into the unit. That's the reason for it.
Never heard of the Knox box, but if that's what they need, that'd be easy to do.
I know that the building official and the fire marshal will be meeting with the Block family and with their architect. Their architect's been on vacation, so they haven't been able to have that meeting before now. And they will be reviewing both the prescriptive requirements like the Knox box as well as alternative means and methods should the Planning Commission approve this special use permit. And if I may, Mr. Chair, if I could ask the property owners to speak to the floor plan on page A101 and kind of describe the proposed unit on the 2nd floor of the garage.
Okay, just a second. Which one are you talking about? Okay, so the unit above the garage, it'll be 785 square feet. It is open, it's a loft area. It doesn't have, so basically I guess we'd call it, what do you call it, when there's no separate bedrooms and efficiency. It just has the living room, bedroom, kitchen all in one area, so there's no dividing walls. Like a bowling. Pretty much, yes.
Window locations are just on the end, and there are some dormers as well? Or?
Yes, and there's also skylights too facing our building, so they're not exposed to the street.
So there's no windows on the north side of the building?
No, correct, you're right, correct.
Okay, I didn't think I saw any there. So.
No.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dolwell.
If a residential unit is constructed on that 2nd floor of the garage, is the only access through the bridge, or can if there's an occupant on that 2nd floor, do they have another exit instead of just the bridge way?
There's just the bridge, and that will be talked about with the fire department. They're the ones that take care of that, but all the windows that have been put in match the egress that they want up in Reno, which is a little bit bigger than Carson. So the double hung windows are 38 inches wide and 51 inches tall.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Public comment at this time. Anyone wish to come up and comment on this project or any comments made? Would you state your name when you come forward for the record, sir, please?
Is Jack McLaughlin, 611 West Robinson. Live just behind, let's see, just behind the unit. Jed is to be commended. He is a member of the HRC for a long time and a president of the HRC, I believe. And so he's done a good job, and I'm assuming all along he abstained on any vote that would relate to this property or any other property that he owns. But he's done a good job and serves his community well in that capacity. But we were here, and I think you might have a letter that my wife wrote. She would love to be here, but she's can't make it because of health reasons. It's about promises. And when this building was first proposed way back, we had a meeting in our carriage house, and we talked to Jed, and neighbors talked to Jed, and they attended the meeting that was held on the meetings that were held on this item. And he promised at that time that there would never be a unit on the top floor. There wouldn't be dormers looking down into our houses. The windows at the end were small, and also he would tear down the tin shed that sat on our property line. Those are promises that he made. So we were kind of surprised when we came back from a little vacation and saw that he was working hard on putting a unit into that second story, and a little surprised at that the promises that were made back then were not kept. And so we we commend him for what he's done to that building. It's just gorgeous. He's really added to our historical subdivision there. We really do that, but I guess our only advice is just to be, like you're doing, be very careful and cautious about what is going on here, and make sure that he follows through. We would love to see that building, little tin building that sits on our property line, torn down, as he promised to do a long time ago. And it's still sitting there. But my wife does explain, that again, we're not. It's hard to criticize Jed. He's been such a great member of our community and of our historical, subdivision area. But on the other hand, we would sure like him to, keep his promises. I mean, he's gone pretty far. I'm assuming that second unit is about done, even though apparently there was a stop notice. The windows were then put in, and he's been out there every day doing something, and he's a very conscientious guy and wants to make sure it's the best it can be. So, but anyway, that's the comment. Just be sure you get it. And the dormers, I heard you ask the question, which is perfect. No dormers apparently on our side. They were in the original drawing, and they would have looked directly down into our bathrooms and bedrooms and so forth. So he's taken those out apparently, but let's hope that they don't reappear somewhere. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Any other comments? Okay. Back to the commission for discussion or. Mr. Salerno.
I would like to make a motion for approval with one additional one additional condition of approval. And I'm a little bit confused when I look at the plans, I go back at them. How many units are there? What I understand, there's a total of 4 living units on the property. I would like a condition number 13 that would state total living units on the property shall be 4, just to clarify that. And with that addition, I would move.
How about not exceed 4?
Not exceed 4?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Not exceed 4. If they wanted to have less, they could. Yep. Yeah. My motion would be, I approve to approve SUP-17-136, a request from Susan Block, property owner, Spear and Phillips LLC, for a special use permit to allow the expansion of a non-conforming use, multifamily residential on property zone single-family 6,000 and located at 504 Phillips Street, APN 003-243-04, based on the ability to make findings as outlined in the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval, which would include that one that I just recommended.
One question. Do we need to ask the applicant if they accept condition 13, or is it just automatically taken?
You can call them up and ask.
Would you mind stepping forward again, please? You heard the addition that it not exceed 4 units.
Yes,
it could be
and
less.
that's
Is that fine?
That is perfectly
Great.
acceptable, yes.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I'll just remind the commission the staff did recommend 2 changes to the condition of approval. For the benefit of the record, I'll read it into the record. 1, an additional condition, we can call it 14, that the proposed construction creates a change of use from R3 to R2 occupancy. The applicant must submit plans and obtain permits to convert the space to an R2 occupancy. And secondly, added language to conditions 6, 7, and 8, which reads, or identify alternative means and methods to the satisfaction of the building official and the fire marshal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second.
Mr. Engels, second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Consent. Save that. All right, moving forward. SUP-17-132, for possible action to consider a request for a special use permit from Kent Scorgeson, property owner Kent Scorgeson, to allow a multifamily residential use on property zone residential office located at 550 Washington Street, APN 001-201-24. Commissioner Monloy has a statement to read.
Yes, thank you, Chair. NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. I currently reside in a rental property within the notice radius of the subject property of the SUP. However, the resulting benefit or determinant occurring to me as a result of this action item is not greater than the occurring to any other member of the group living within the notice radius. Therefore, legal counsel has advised me that I do not have a significant pecuniary interest that would be a disqualifying conflict. Because the public policy of the state favors me performing the duties for which I was appointed, unless I have a disqualifying conflict of interest, I will be participating in this matter. Thank you.
I have a quick statement to make. I've known Dr. Scogerson for years. I sell medical supplies, and many years ago used to call in his office, but have had, I believe you're retired now and haven't called on your office for a number of years, but I had no interest or whatever in any of that, but just wanted to let him know that I had known the doctor and my business passed. I think we're okay there.
Years ago, I believe I had Dr. Scogerson as my doctor for some issues, so, but it's been a number of years ago, and he probably doesn't remember me from Adam. So anyway, there you go.
I think we're all good.
Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. The applicant is seeking to convert an office building to a multifamily residential use. The applicant's not certain that he wants to pursue 100% conversion, and he may pursue a partial conversion resulting in a mixed-use building, which would be office and residential. In condition number 5, the staff notes that the partial conversion would be substantially consistent with the approval. However, it was brought to our attention, and thank you, commissioners, when you ask questions, and figure out what I missed. That with the both office and residential there, depending on the distribution of the uses, there may result in insufficient parking. And so staff would suggest that condition 5 have added language to that condition that recognizes a partial conversion would be substantially consistent with the approval, provided that adequate on-site parking is provided. Having said that, the master plan designation for the site is mixed-use residential. The zoning is a non-residential zoning district. It's residential office. Multifamily dwellings are a conditional use in the residential office zoning district. Therefore, a special use permit is required. But because it's a non-residential zoning district, we also have to utilize the supplemental standards and findings of Section 1.18 of our development standards. The subject property is in the historic district, but it's a non-contributing building, having been constructed in 1991. The applicant does anticipate minimal modifications to the exterior, but as we just talked about, by virtue of being in the historic district, any exterior modifications will be subject to review and approval by the Historic Resource Commission. In terms of the use, and again, what's before you is a request to have multifamily residential in the RO zoning district, which is a conditional use, so we have to consider the 7 findings of fact for a special use permit. Staff has been able to make those findings in the affirmative, subject to the conditions of approval. Staff would remind the Commission that we are recommending the added language to condition number 5 regarding the necessity for adequate on-site parking should the use be a combination of the office and the residential. And we'd also like to note a correction on condition 15. It calls out Spear Street. That should be Washington Street. The applicants, Keith Schaefer and Karen Downs from Manhard Consulting, are present, as is their client, and I'm happy to answer questions. I was brief, but I feel like the staff report hopefully was clear, and I believe we can support this application.
Any questions for staff? Commissioner Stowell.
It talked about the landscaping not being in the front setback, but when I was looking at the plans, it looks like some of the river rock is within the front setback. I don't know if that's really an issue, but just a question.
No, you're right. And actually, as I was writing this, I was like, I felt like it was all in the front setback. But I think the building is set back farther than the front setback. So they have a space between the building and the required setback area, and they're taking a credit on that area, which they're allowed to do.
Other questions for staff? Okay, would the applicant or representative like to come or make their presentation or add to, or?
No, Karen.
For the record?
For the record, Keith Schaefer with Manhard Consulting, Chairman Steller and members of the commission. I just wanted to introduce to you Karen Downs from our office, who is a planner, and she's been working on this application, and let her make any remarks that she would like to make. We have read the conditions of approval, and we'd like to talk to you about a few of them specifically. And but if there are any planning items, we're going to let Karen take those on, and I'll be back for support. So
yeah. It is my first time at your planning commission meeting. So hi, I'm Karen Downs. Chris Baker is normally here. He's the planning manager, and he said he would miss you all tonight. So I'm here. One of the questions that we did have was on condition number 15 regarding the existing sidewalk panels. And we were suggesting perhaps there might be a site review with staff to determine whether or not those needed to be replaced.
If you just want to speak directly to the commission, to the extent there are questions, the commissioners will ask the staff.
Okay. So that's all I have. I can answer any questions you have on the project.
I believe that it's where the roots have gotten under and lifted substantially the sidewalk sections.
Yeah, so Dan Stuckey, city engineer for the record. So I think the applicant is just wanting, it wasn't real clear when they went out into the field to investigate which were the 4 panels. And So they're just asking for possibly city staff to go out there and look at the panels and identify which panels.
So there's not a problem with doing it, it's just identifying and make sure we do the right ones.
Exactly, is my understanding.
Correct.
And staff is open to working with the applicant to identify those.
And probably coming to an agreement also on if maybe they don't all four need to be replaced, that would be okay as well, as if staff concurs.
All right. Any questions?
Just on the idea that maybe some of the office space would still be left, could you provide any more information about that? Because that's what I was confused. I thought the whole building was automatically going to be changed over to residential.
That was the original intent when we submitted the application, was for the entire building to convert into 5 multifamily uses. After looking at maybe how that would be done, the applicant might, there still isn't a final plan, but he may want to keep a portion of, and the applicant is also here for questions, but he might want to keep some of that office space as he has made some improvements in that area, and see if he's able to rent that out as well. So it might be more of a tiered process and start with 3 multifamily units and then either convert the other side or not.
So it's not, I thought maybe it was leaving the upstairs as office space. Or
the upstairs would be converted to residential and keep a portion of the downstairs office.
Just having called on that building, I believe down, you come in the front door and there's 2 offices on either side, then you go up the stairs and there's some smaller space up above.
Correct.
So it would be one of the 2 downstairs possibly would remain, but 3 units would be converted immediately. Okay. Commissioner?
I've got my question answered.
Okay. Any other questions for? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Keith Schaefer with Manhard. I just want to let you know, to give you a little bit of history, this is, you would think, a great office space in a great location right there on Washington Street, but the owner, and he could speak to that, and I hope he gets an opportunity to do that here in a minute, but he's had that up for sale or for lease to try to occupy for the last year, and it's just not happening. So he's looking at the highest best use for that area to try to make it attractive. He went in on one side of it and made some pretty significant improvements and spent some money on that, and he would like to kind of wait to see if maybe he could lease that space and convert the other. In my calculations, it required 12, maybe 13 parking spaces if we did that arrangement the way that our plans currently exist, and we have that currently on site. The site plan shows that we're striped for 10, but there are 3 more existing that are on one side that we didn't show, only because when we were going to convert it to 5 residential spaces, it only needed 10. So we only showed the 10 and took the others away. It's just a matter of striping. I would like to just speak on behalf of the owner to one condition that we would like for you to consider. Cost is an item that needs to be considered by the owner when he moves forward with this, and there was not an intent, or there is an intent, not to make any improvements to the exterior whatsoever. We weren't planning on redoing any part of the parking lot, any part of the driveway, any part of the sidewalk. So when it comes to the sidewalk panels, I walked the site. I couldn't see any that had heaved, really. I could see some that had recently been ground down. When you get a sidewalk that comes up a little bit, there are some that had been ground flush, and they're flush now. And the reason that's significant, and it speaks to condition 14, that we would request that we strike from the conditions. And we understand the reasoning for this. When an applicant comes in to change the use or make a modification in a property, it's the opportunity for the city to say, hey, we've got some facilities around that property that might not meet code, might not meet the ADA code, and so that's our opportunity to have that property owner take the city sidewalk and make it meet ADA requirements. The scope of this project will not require him to have any excavators on site, any site work contractors on site. This is an interior remodel to realign some interior walls to make it residential space. And so you know, we can understand if we were doing some exterior work to say, okay, if we touch that, we're going to cut that out and maybe make it an ADA accessible driveway. But what they're asking us to do is to take the driveway entrance onto Minnesota, saw cut that out, take it out, and re-put it right back in, but now with the flares that meet the ADA accessibility requirements. And so that would, you know, we would be mobilizing a whole different trade, a whole different discipline of construction just to meet this condition. We wouldn't have that individual on the site otherwise. And so we're asking for your consideration to eliminate item number 14 entirely. And then, of course, if we do work with staff to determine that there's some sidewalk panels that we could take out, maybe we could do that there. But it's a little more significant, and it could add $20,000 to the cost pretty easily. So that's what we're applying for your consideration. All the rest of the conditions, we don't have a problem with. We understand that currently it is not fire sprinklered, but it will need to be as a residential use, and so there will be some cost or some things that we need to do there on the inside of the building to make that work, as well as meeting the rest of the building code requirements for a residential apartment use. So that's the biggie, and I apologize that I didn't get that to staff beforehand. I was just, you know, we were just thinking about that today and saying, boy, we're not going to have those kinds of trades on the job to make this conversion. So we're offering that for your consideration.
Having called in that building when Dr. Weed and Bottenberg and them were in there, there is 4 or 5 parking spaces on the west side, isn't there? As you come in off Washington, is there just 3? I thought there were several.
Sure. Well, and that driveway entrance onto Washington Street has been recently redone, so that meets the ADA code requirements. And the parking we will require and stripe and make sure that the parking and the routing to the building will meet the ADA code. But to go out to the Minnesota Street and take out the entrance, the driveway entrance out there, it's a section of the sidewalk that goes through the entrance. So.
Because I believe the back entrance to the building too, there's no step up or anything there. It's just straight in. It's ADA as well.
Yeah, so the site itself is ADA accessible.
It's just the one Minnesota thing.
Yeah, it's just making the sidewalk that runs along Minnesota to meet code, to meet the city's ADA code. But the sidewalk is the city's. It's outside of the property. It's in the right-of-way.
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay.
Hand there. The question for staff.
I have a question for staff. Elise Monroy for the record. So I just want to talk about this. So what was the reason that staff added this condition? Are conditions like this regarding ADA compliance of driveways standard when we are looking at residential uses / office uses and/or office uses? So I just think I want to talk this through before we have, with staff, before we have commissioner conversation about removing it or not. Thank you.
Yeah, Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director, and I wanted to talk about that because I just had a conversation with the city engineer about that. So a lot of these conditions are in here are from the building code, from the fire code. Having a little discussion on the side here, perhaps we need to change what actually goes in the conditions that you're considering, because some of these, like this condition about the sidewalk, would be a condition of construction whether or not this was coming to the Planning Commission. This particular code, in talking to the city engineer, this particular code can be waived by the Public Works Director. So I think what I would suggest that we should do is keep it in there, but we can talk to the Public Works Director about that waiver. So kind of like these fire codes, things that are right out of code, it's not really within the Planning Commission's purview to say you don't need a Knox box if the fire code requires a Knox box. So my suggestion, based on this conversation, is keep it in there, have that conversation with the Public Works Director to see if he'll waive that.
And reflect the building and the Washington Street entrance already do meet that code as well, correct?
The Washington Street entrance does meet code, correct, Stephen? Yes. It's just the Minnesota entrance.
Isn't the Minnesota entrance only an exit? If I recall correctly, it's one way in, one way out. So that's not changing.
No.
It's still one way in, one way out. So there would be no incoming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because
I guess this is for Public Works. What is the condition of the Minnesota Street entrance that needs to be modified? And I mean,
Stephen Pote with Public Works for the record. That is an old driveway apron, so it doesn't meet the slopes for ADA, so like a wheelchair going across.
So it's the apron itself. Is it the sidewalk or is it the apron?
It's the apron itself.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it doubles as a sidewalk. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to do that.
All right.
You know, you can make the sidewalk go behind an apron, but in this case, that is, the apron and the sidewalk are concurrent. You know, so you have to step down onto the apron and walk across.
Okay, and there is some slope on the apron, apparently. Mm-hmm. That's greater than the 2% of the ADA.
There you go.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, in response to Commissioner Monroy's comment and piggybacking on what the Community Development Director said, I would suggest in Condition 14 added language to the satisfaction of the Public Works Director and the building official. Typically, your building official is the enforcement agent for ADA, and that way it will be punted to those two agencies for enforcement of their regulations.
Well, I understand where we're going. If it's going to be a code-related item that would come up as a comment in a set of permit documents that we would have to arm wrestle with the building official and the Public Works Director on, then why don't we just remove it as a condition of the Planning Commission recommendation?
We're getting to the same place.
Right, but if it's going to come up as a comment, then we can. But you know, to have it, you know, in here as a condition of the special use permit, I think if it's going to be a permit item, let me address it in the design of the building as a permit item, just like I would anything else, you know, the steps and the stairs and the firewall and those kinds of things.
So wait, are we saying we're fine to remove it or fine to leave it and let him deal with it?
I don't think it makes any difference which way you go.
I don't think it makes any difference, at least Monroy for the record. It already sounds like there's a process in order to deal with this, and I think we should just deal.
We can remove it.
No, we should leave it, and then he can go through the Public Works, is what I mean, that process, it sounds to me like that's been established, that process, so I don't know why we would change that if there's a process to address this already.
But you wouldn't need it in the conditions if it's part of a...
At least if it helps. I think we have it clear on the record now. I mean, he's getting to the point that I was starting to make about what should be within the conditions of the Planning Commission in their purview versus what are comments on plans. So he's on the record knowing this may be a comment that's dealt with through the building permit for this change of use. I think that's fine. So if it moves us along and deletes it, I think that's fine.
I didn't mean to create a hill that we're going to die on here.
On that recommendation of staff, I don't see a problem with removing it then.
Yeah, we're comfortable with that. And so that's item, just to be clear, 14 and 15? Unless I don't have the correct.
We're fine with 15. We'll walk it with you on 15.
Okay.
They're going to walk 15 and see where it is and whatever, and what the problem is.
Well, but see, that's some I do and some I don't. We're going to walk 15 and we'll talk to you about it, but we're not going to do 14 because we don't want to talk to you about 14. It just seems like we ought to pass all the conditions and let the things work themselves out. They're requirements, aren't they?
Yeah, so the conditions as they're in here, we've kind of established a process where we take the comments from the various departments and building departments and fire and incorporate them in here so you know they're all. I think we need to reevaluate that. I don't know that we're prepared right now to go through each condition and determine if it's a building code requirement or an additional requirement. So I think to the extent that we can agree on at this time as to which ones can stay, I just prefer to do that.
We're fine as long as we can work it out. You know, I think we can. You know, if it's going to be a development requirement, I mean, if it's actually in code that says if all we're doing is an interior remodel, we need to do a change on the entrance, which I'm not entirely sure that's true. You know, you go into your, into an office and you do a remodel in the office, and I know the kicker here is that we're changing the use. That's the big, and that's to be consistent, through everything that we do in the city. That's the important part. So
if staff and whatever are comfortable with removing 14 and leaving 15, I don't think we have a problem with that, do we?
Well, just to get things going, then I'll make a motion so that we can then.
We had public comment, yeah.
Oh, we haven't.
No.
Okay.
I'm done making a mess. I can sit down. So, thank you.
Anyone for public comment on this issue?
I guess so.
Name, please.
Hello, I'm Julie Maxwell, and I live right on Minnesota Street, and I can see Dr. Skogerson's building from where I live. I've lived in my property on Minnesota Street for about 12 years, and it has been my observation that with these businesses and commercial buildings, there's been a subtle transition into residential, and I have observed that over the years. And I think one of the things that my concern is common area. How many of you have a backyard or a place to live to have your barbecue? I mean, I know that building has plenty of parking, but we're social creatures, and people would go to these buildings, but then at night, they're commercial, so everyone goes home at night, and it's pretty quiet. But if this is going to be transitioned to a residential, people are going to be living around concrete. And the front of the building just has river rock, and so you can't live in front of the building, and in the back of the building, are they just going to hang out in the parking lot like the other buildings, like the other residences that have transitioned in the neighborhood where people don't have a living space outside? So there's more dogs, there's more density, there's just people living outside and no place to go. So I'm just proposing that it's okay for this transition to happen, but create a nice living space for people that live there. And I'm not talking like a big space, just a community space. So that's kind of my comment. And it keeps the continuity of the historic district and the charm of the area intact. And that's why people want to live on the west side, because it's charming and there's places to live. Thank you.
Do you mind if yeah. Hi, Dr. Skogerson here. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the opportunity to serve some of you. I've listened to everything. It's all great. These two have represented me well. I wanted to address your question specifically because as a physician, 38 years, I am retired, and we don't get pensions. So we have to have provisions for our retirement, and that building was designed to be our pension, my wife and I. So, and it has been vacant, and so that's put a little dent in things. So we're trying to phase it in different phases so it's the expense is manageable. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think Karen addressed that because we spent a huge amount of money getting the other office finished, carpet, paint, flooring, and I hate to see that torn out and at the expense of trying to get apartments in there. So we're just going to deal with the one side, and then to address this young lady's question about green space. Yeah, the river rock's not very attractive, but it's not what we wanted. It's just something that we had junipers in there, and the fire department said, get those out of there. So we did. So what was our alternative? We used river rock. I would like to see a space for tenants. I would like to see grass. I would like to see a small patch. We got plenty of room in front, plenty of room on the side, and we do have a barrier there with a bench and the table. So if tenants wanted to go out there, they could use that. And there's a park just down Minnesota Street, Treadway Park, I think it is. I'm not sure the name of it, but it's just down by the hospital. And it's only a block. So anyway, that addresses that issue. So we're just trying to recover our pension and get this thing sort of launched and get back into the stream of things. Thanks.
Any other comments from? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for discussion or motion.
I have a question, one more question for staff. And again, you guys just, I think, spend most of your time answering my questions, educating me on the process, but it's really helpful to me. I understand that this is a special use permit, but so I would like to see if the commission can respond to some of the public comment we heard about open space and green space. So there are kids that live in the unit behind the one that we're considering, and they play in the street all the time. They ride their bikes, they ride their scooters, they play football in the street all the time, because that's where they play, they're kids. So despite the fact the park is up the street, they still play in the street. So other times that we've we've considered I guess these types of multi-family apartments, I think they're under the planned unit development or something like that. We have a consideration of green space or open space or common space. Why is that not being considered here? And then the applicant did say on the record that he would support some sort of green space, common space, a small space for the tenants. Is that something that can be added as a condition? Of course, they would have to accept it, and it sounds like they don't want to incur any extra costs on the outside of the building. But if you guys could just educate me on the process and why we're not considering green space or open space here, it'd be helpful.
You actually are considering open space. It's on page 6 of your report, and I call out the requirements. And I'm reading from page 6. For projects of 10 units or more, there's requirements for what I'm going to call active space. So that's kind of what you're talking about, something that has certain dimensions that can be play space. And what you'll often see in my conditions of approval on larger apartment complexes is I ask for a graphic that delineates those areas they're arguing are the active recreational areas versus passive recreational areas, so that I can verify those dimensions. In this case, since the unit count is under 10, they have the requirement for what I'm going to call the passive or almost the visual break, but not for the more active spaces, which could be someplace where kids could kick a ball or whatever. The other thing is on the River Rock, I have the exact same takeaway. I looked at that and I thought, well, that's not open space, that's River Rock. You can't use that space. And so I went back and read the code, and there was nothing in the code that said that the open space had to be a landscaped area. So I did make the exact same observation and looked into it, because that was my instinct too, that the River Rock was not going to count for open space. But when I then read the code, I saw that my instinct was wrong.
And I don't think I'd want them kicking a ball out on Washington Street more than...
No, but cars drive on Minnesota too, and they still kick the ball out there.
Just one question. Looking at the proposed units, I didn't see, and again, this may be because it's so preliminary, any laundry units, individual laundry units, washer dryers in the units, and just questioned whether there was an idea that there were going to be individual washer dryers or a common area for washer dryers in the units.
I can speak to that. There is not going to be a common laundry room for this. Some of the units, I think the way we've laid it out so far is not all of them do, but I can't think right now of the one that doesn't. I think we have some closets in there for a vertical, but I think that's up to him to decide if he wants to have a unit that's going to have a launder, a place for laundry in it or not. We haven't found a thing in any part of the code that requires us to do that, or if they just go down to the laundromat. But I know that to make them attractive spaces, we have looked at the space that we have available and the square footage, and that's what it comes down to, is what's the usable space and where can we make that wall divide, and can we get a laundry room in there or can we not? So those floor plans are almost done, but they're coming to fruition. So yes and no. No laundry facility general to the unit. They would be inside the units. Mm-hmm.
Let me just add a comment. We intend, my wife and I intend to have each unit, as we progress, have facilities, meaning stackables. So we want to make it as convenient as possible. Yeah.
If you're taking comments, I always love to make comments. So I would just like to say I had some initial concerns about this application, but with the change to the condition regarding, or the condition number 5 about the partial conversion, I was really confused as to whether or not this was a full conversion or partial conversion, and if it was going to be a partial conversion, I had some concerns about the parking situation because there's cars in and out all day. They park in front of my house, and if I go home for lunch, good luck finding a parking spot. So my concern was specific to parking, but I'm glad to hear that staff has addressed the partial conversion issue, noting that they would now have to provide adequate parking if it's going to be residential and business, because and business. And I also just would like to say that I appreciate the use of an existing building to bring additional rental inventory into the community, because we know that's an issue, and I think this was a great way to reuse an existing building that's going to preserve the character of the neighborhood. But as Ms. Maxwell commented during public comment, I think that as the city goes forward and as this neighborhood maybe continues to change, maybe we be more, we as planners and commissioners can be more careful in looking at the active open space where kiddos can ride scooters and bikes and kickballs. So those are my comments. Thank you.
More further discussion or a motion?
I just want to thank Commissioner Monroy for that. We do need more multifamily, and it's a great use of adaptive reuse of that existing property. And I was another thought I had. I totally lost it, but it's great. And obviously the applicant identified there's a glut of commercial space in Carson as well as in Douglas County. And so you're seeing a lot of these kind of conversion projects coming forward, which is good because it's meeting the demand for housing in both communities. So thank you.
Anyone else or a motion?
I'll make it. I move to approve SUP-17-132, a special use permit request to allow the conversion of an office building to a 5-unit multifamily residential building on property zone residential office located at 550 West Washington Street, APN 001-201-24, based on the findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report as modified. Modified number 5 to address the parking and dropping
15 to walk through.
50, right, I'm getting there.
Oh.
Eliminating 14 and adding to the existing number 15 that it is Washington Street.
We have a motion, we have a second.
I second.
Commissioner Tingle seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Good luck.
Second.
Commissioner Tingle. I'm sorry. Can we take a break for a second before?
You're the chair.
Yeah. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, if that's okay.
Somebody drive me out to my car, so I can drive back? I'm not even sure where I park. I parked over by a big tree somewhere. I circled the lot for about 20 minutes.
So it's on the so I called the agent. So I called the agent. Call the sheriff and ask for typical commercial agent. So I don't know what to do. But he mentioned the story. He mentioned something in the window that was done, and he said it's the seasonal deal. And I looked it up in the story, and it was about storage and like apartments.
Back to the action. Ready. E4. ZCA-16-199 revised for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding an ordinance amending Title 18 zoning, Chapter 18.03 definitions, Section 18.03.010, words and terms defined to modify definition of dwelling, single family, and the definition of single family dwelling and other matters properly related thereto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. Essentially, what the state said is when you define a single-family dwelling, you need to include group homes, residential care facilities, and halfway houses. Our code actually already includes those facilities, if you will. You may recall on January 25th, 2017, I brought forward an amendment to the Planning Commission to basically eliminate those facilities. You voted to support that or to recommend approval to the board, but then we stopped. And I believe it was Commissioner Stoll, before she was a commissioner, who flagged for us that the legislature was about to revisit the definition of single-family dwelling. And so we sat tight while the legislature met, and based on what came out of the legislature, there's modified language in NRS, so we have recommended some minor modifications to the existing definitions just to put our definitions in line with NRS. You do have 3 required findings to make when you consider a zoning code amendment. I believe those findings can be made, and I am recommending approval. I will state for the record, the DA's office did not have the opportunity to review the ordinance prior to this meeting. Given the scope of changes, and that's essentially mimicking the wording of NRS, I don't anticipate any changes by the district attorney's office would be substantive in nature, but I do want to alert you that he may have some technical changes that are non-substantive when he has an opportunity to look at it. But I am recommending that based on the ordinance before you today, that you recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
If he had some recommendations, would that have to then come back to us, or probably not?
If they were substantive, I would bring it back to you, because otherwise your recommendation wouldn't reflect the ordinance before the board. But given the scope of these changes vis-a-vis NRS, I don't anticipate substantive changes.
Any questions for staff? Commissioner Stowell.
Really happy to see this, and really and truly, it's unfortunate that there had to be so much effort in basically putting this back into NRS, because what the legislature was supposed to be doing in the 2013 legislative session was simply addressing the spacing requirements and the registry requirements in NRS that were thrown out by the U.S. District Court because of Nevada Fair Housing Center. Instead, they gutted the entire language in NRS dealing with group homes should be allowed in the single-family zoning districts. So that whole thing was gutted, and it's really extraordinary, but just very glad to see the language still in there and then consistent with NRS as it is today. So thank you to staff.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, wait, just a second. No one's here. Call for public comment. Seeing none, I will bring it back to Commissioner Borden.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of ZCA 16-119A, an ordinance amending Title 18, Chapter 18.03 definitions, Section 18.03.010 words and terms defined, to modify the definition of dwelling single-family and the definition of single-family dwelling and other matters properly related thereto.
We have a motion by Commissioner Borders. We have a second by Commissioner Stowell. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries. Okay. Moving on. ZCA-17-157 for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding an ordinance amending Title 18 zoning, Chapter 18.05, General Provisions, Section 18.05.080, to revise the standards of wind energy conversion systems and providing other matters properly related thereto. Staff?
Again, in 2017, while the legislature met, they amended NRS to delete provisions that would allow the city to impose restrictions on the use of a system for obtaining wind energy, which is related to height. So we are no longer to have prescribed restrictions on height of these systems, but it allows the governing body to deny a permit based on the height if the size, height, or configuration of the system is a danger to health, welfare, and safety, or not compatible with the character of the area in which the system is located in. The amendment eliminates the prescribed height limit and incorporates the language regarding the findings for denial. There are 3 required findings when you consider a zoning text amendment. Staff has provided you with a report where I believe those findings can be met, and I am recommending approval. As with the last item, the district attorney's office did not have an opportunity to review the ordinance prior to it coming before you, but given the scope of this and given that we're just basically mimicking the language that the legislature put in place, I don't believe any modifications by the DA's office would be substantive in nature. If they are, of course, I'd bring it back to you, but I am recommending approval of this ordinance, or that you recommend approval of this ordinance. Thank you.
I had a little difficulty with this initially till I read the full ordinance, and I was concerned, but as long as page 2C, the setback stayed there, I was concerned that the height, and it's got to be 1.1. So, because we had a few years ago that were quite tall, and they were worried with the setback thing. But with that in there, I don't have a problem with it. Any other questions for staff? Bring it back.
Public comment.
Public comment. Seeing none, we'll bring it.
I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of ZCA-17-157, an ordinance amending Title 18, Chapter 18.05, General Provisions, Section 18.05.080, Private Use Wind Energy Conversion Systems, to eliminate prescriptive height limitations, to add supplemental review standards, and providing other matters properly related thereto.
We have a motion by Commissioner Eschwein. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Salerno. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Staff reports.
Good evening. Just got a couple things just to update you on. Let me get to the right page here. Just on items that have been before the Planning Commission in the past and have gone to the Board of Supervisors in October. On October 5th, the Board of Supervisors passed the second reading of the Title 18 ordinance related to marijuana uses. I think I've mentioned this before, but as adopted, it was passed with a maximum of 2 retail stores, effective January 1st, so, and only co-located with the medical marijuana distribution, so it's limited to 2 in Carson City. And as you remember, I think I also mentioned there'll be no type of marijuana establishment in limited industrial anywhere, which was a area of concern for the distributors by a lot of residents, so that's been taken out. Then on October 19th, this is not something that came before the board, but Lampa Ranch Development Agreement was approved on first reading, or at least introduced on first reading of an ordinance for the Lampa Ranch Development Agreement. And it basically provides for a lot of the requirements that have already been placed on the overall specific plan for area that has been before the board. In addition, as you probably read in the paper, they've agreed to the fire fee, per unit fire fee that was already part of the thing. But in addition to that, through this process, they've worked with the school district, are working on getting them a site and paying for that through a per residential unit fee. So that was approved by the Board of Supervisors.
Lee, does that ordinance say anything about how the school district is going to get the money? I know it's like $1,000.
Yeah, so the question is how the school district, it doesn't provide for how the school district will get the money. It does. The city's going to collect the $1,000 with the building permit, and so the city will be the pass-through, so it will come with each building permit. We won't issue a building permit without that fee. It will be the pass-through to get the money to the school district.
The school district won't get the money up front.
And the school district does not get the money up front, correct?
Thank you.
There's some... Yeah, there's provisions in there about at what point, and I forget the details of it, but there's provisions at what point in the development that they exercise their right to take the property by paying a small portion of the value of the property that was agreed upon by them, and then the developer would, through pass-through, to get paid the rest through the development fees at that point. For the next Planning Commission meeting, we have a special use permit for an accessory structure exceeding 75% single-family 1 acre on Center Drive, keeping along with the Lampa development phasing plan. We have a tentative subdivision map in for Phase 2 for another 209 units, which along the South 5th Street side and the freeway, kind of that corner of the property. And this is assuming these are complete, these will come forward. We have a zoning code amendment to talk about zoning for tattoo parlors in November. Something we had an old ordinance that only permits them in a certain area, so we'll have that discussion in November. And also November is a master plan amendment cycle, and we'll have the master plan annual report on the agenda. So I'll give that also.
Did you say there was a Lampa coming in November?
Lampa tentative subdivision map has been submitted. Assuming it's complete and goes forward, it would come forward in November to the Planning Commission. Okay, that's all I have. The November meeting is the 29th. It's still the last Wednesday of the month because it's after the week of Thanksgiving.
At the regular time?
Yeah. Regular time.
December will be the 20th at 1.
Sure, yeah.
And I won't
start to get it on your radar. December is, you said the 20th?
I won't be here. The 20th at 1.
The 20th, so it's the week before Christmas, and it's in the afternoon, so we avoid a conflict with another meeting in here.
Okay, let's see. Sorry. Future commissioner reports or comments. Any commissioners?
November may not be ideal. It sounds like it's going to be a pretty busy agenda, but would it be feasible to have just an open discussion at the end of an agenda, if not November, maybe December, just open discussion with the Planning Commission and staff about accessory dwelling units, taking no action or anything, just open discussion on the agenda?
That's probably a good topic for a recommendation under the master plan. Isn't there a policy about that? I think there's already a policy in there, so that would be appropriately discussed, and you can make a recommendation under that item.
Thank you.
Public comment. Seeing none, I make a motion for adjournment.